Hey, Jasmine, Lisa, got good variety here, planning staff. So, okay. Mandy, you're here?
I am.
Okay. You want to start off by calling the roll?
Yes. Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Ms. Kennedy?
Here.
Mr. Peterson? Mr. Constant? I saw Chris just in and it said he was leaving, so he may be logging back in. Mr. Dunbar?
I'm here, but I'm just observing. I'm not on this subcommittee.
Okay. Ms. Zalatel?
Here.
Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Here.
Chair, you have a quorum.
Good. All right. Thanks. And this is was advertised and it's open to the public and so on. Is that correct, Mandy?
Yes, that's correct.
We have. Okay. Good. Okay. So welcome everybody, Community Economic Development Committee subcommittee on focusing on homeless and transient shelters and conditional use requirements. And we've met a couple times. And I think last meeting we had a good presentation from the planning staff that outlined the requirements for a conditional use and a special land use permit. And had some recommendations, kind of outlined what we might go forward. There was a to-do list on there, and we've managed to do one of the things in the to-do list, which was we voted down and postponed indefinitely AO 2020-58. And then we have the other several items. And one is identify license process, then develop the conditional use process for the SLUP. And their presentation discussed both of those, and the special land use process would be a little more complicated to implement in our code, but would give the assembly final decision on that as opposed to the planning commission. Then prepare the ordinances, complete Title 21 text amendments to go through the planning commission and the assembly. And it would all take some amount of time. 6 to 9 months was anticipated. So it'd be early next year we'd finish doing that process. So a bit of a recap. And then today we have, I guess to continue on that, some of what would be the various requirements of a license and a special land use permit, or decide should we go with the SLUP or the conditional use. And I don't recall if we had decided that last meeting. And then Meg had fairly extensive kind of outline of an operator agreement that combined both shelters and transient shelter. And I think we should probably go through that at some point. So any thoughts from the committee? Okay, so for planning staff that's there, did you have a presentation?
Hi, this is Michelle McNulty, the planning director. No, we do not have a presentation.
Okay, you know, at your presentation last time, you outlined the pros and cons for special land use permit and conditional use, and I didn't make a note. Did we land on one as the preferred?
Yes, so it was ruled out for not only the additional work that would take to create the SLUP process, but also the higher legal risk perceived to be associated with that. It was determined to stick with the conditional use process with a simultaneous license process that would go separate but concurrently, and then tie the two together. So essentially, a use-specific standard of homeless and transient shelters may be that something to the effect that it has to have a approved local license.
Okay, and then as far as you had outlined in your presentation, a variety of possible conditions to go on that conditional use. So, and that's still something to work on, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and then similarly with the license, and then Meg, your presentation is focused mostly on the license. I guess an operator agreement it's not exactly the license. Is that correct?
Thanks, John. it's it's standards, and then how we determine we're going to adopt those standards, I think will be, I think it's been discussed through a license, but that the document I provided or something similar might be more adopted by reference.
Okay. And as kind of as part of the license process, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And then, okay, so at some point, is your Meg expectation to kind of work through that?
We can. I put it out there. What if we work through it? I guess my request would be that we identify red flags, follow up other issues, so that we can back maybe with a small work group to work through them. Because I went as comprehensive as possible, feeling like it would be easier to take things out or modify things, trying to catch kind of every category I could come up with. And of course, I'll look forward to some of the subject matter expertise. I also wanted to start to flag where it dovetails with use specific standards and Title 21. I believe when I sent it out to you, I had indicated that there's like a facilities section that probably is the most overlap. And so I think we just have to start to figure out where there is overlap so that we can make sure we're doing the concurrent process.
Okay. Okay. So we'll do that today. That would be good. And then we have Lisa Aquino and Jasmine here, perhaps others. Lisa and Jasmine, have you seen Meg's work, or have you maybe start with Lisa and then Jasmine? What's your involvement so far in the work we're doing, and what might be your expectations?
So hi, thanks, John. This is Lisa. I've known that Meg was working on something. She came to our shelter work group and shared with us sort of the direction she was going, but I hadn't seen anything. This is the first time that I've seen anything about what, like the complete document and everything that would be in there. We did at Catholic Social Services, we shared some of our documents with Meg and others in the shelter work group if they'd be helpful. We're accredited by COA, the Council on Accreditation, and so there's some shelter standards, so I know we shared those. And then I think it's an ongoing conversation. I think there's probably a broad range of opinions among shelter providers, and Jasmine, I'm sure, can speak to that. But I think, I also think there could be some real goodness in this, and all of us working together to get there. It just with regulation comes more reporting and different kinds of costs for some of my partner organizations that those would be. I mean, for us that will be a change, but certainly for smaller organizations that could be hard. So just thinking about all of those in the grander scheme of things. But I'm sort of new to the conversation, but very glad to be here, and thank you.
Okay, and Lisa, this is very early. I mean, we had some brainstormed ideas that we presented last week, and then Meg's kind of outlined really was a framework, I think, drawing from a variety of documents. So we're not like close to saying, hey, here's the law of the land. I mean, we're way earlier than that. So.
Okay, great. So, well, I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much.
Okay. I think I should be watching chat here. I'm going to switch to chat. Okay, so the document we're referring to, Mandy attached in chat as a PDF, if people can get to that. And then it was also emailed out. I'm looking at Crystal's comment. Oh, okay, I'm sorry, Mandy already addressed that. And then, so can Lisa and Jasmine and other people just with us, can they open that document in chat, Mandy?
Anybody on Teams can open it through the chat. Anybody on the phone would need to go to the CEDC webpage, or it was emailed out to everyone on the email list this morning.
Okay, and I see Chris Constant is back. Okay, so that would be for people on the phone who want to see it. You go to muni.org, click on the big assembly icon. Then on the left, it will have a link to assembly committees. I think that's right. And then if you scroll down, you'll see the Community Economic Development Committee and click on the button for the website, and then the documents will be there. So, okay. And Jasmine, did you want to comment briefly before we dive in?
Just to add to what Lisa said, I think that's a good recap that we got the shelter provider group involved several months ago to speak with Meg. Meg and the team from the MOA sent us a copy of that this morning. And so what we did was ask the shelter providers if they can review that very first draft. And then we have a meeting with provider leadership next Friday where we're going to ask them to provide us any comments that they want. And by us, I mean ACEH. I'll be representing the coalition, and Nicole Labo from the health department will be joining us. And our vision really was just in the next week, providers are going to review that draft document. They're going to add any comments or input they have as individual organizations. We'll kind of coalesce that stuff Friday with the hopes that Nicole from the health department and myself can get you guys on this committee back any provider comments. So we are planning to take those steps in the next week or two, but that's really just about getting eyeballs on the document and getting a chance to get provider input early on. I don't know if there's any desire for us to be more involved than that, but that's our plan for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, we want you to be very involved, actually, and quite a number of groups, I think, and you know, kind of the broad goals, I think, and the committee members can certainly chime in, is to set conditional uses that make it a successful operation. That and you would know better than others on how that would work, and have sensitivity to you know, the neighborhood, which obviously is, well, that's a huge issue. You know, how do you fit in and not have negative spin-offs to the neighborhood, and keep them involved and so on. And that's and in Meg kind of framework, the details on those are not necessarily spelled out. So there's a lot of room to plug things in the document. So any comments from other assembly members? Pete, did you show up yet? Okay. Chris?
I'm in the queue. Yeah.
I don't see where. Let me look here. Where's the
9/11?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'm not scrolling through here very well. So
Okay, no worries.
Okay, Chris.
The one thing that appears to be missing, and I'm not sure the right time and place to add this in, would be to have representatives from two stakeholder groups, and that would be the HRAC group, or someone who is capable of participating in this process, who is representative of actual users of these services, and someone that we could work with who represents community councils, maybe from the Federation, but so that we make sure we have kind of those voices as we start to shape these policies. I don't mean that needs to be right now, but for sure we need to have it on our plan and a point where it's right and natural for those different groups to join us for the process.
Yeah, I agree. And there was a little email exchange with the HRAC people. I don't know if that's how they pronounce it, but kind of inviting them to be part of the process. And
right.
So
and the reason I bring this up is they sent out that email alert that was just fraught with inaccuracy, and it was well intended, but it literally got the facts wrong in 360 degrees. And so if we don't have them at the table, then the worst suppositions will be what they believe.
Right. And I responded to that saying, hey, we're way early. There's really nothing to say no to yet. So is there anyone from HRAC here? And Chris, is that Terry Light and Sean Ryan, and who are the people involved? Whoop. Oh, did I lose people?
I'm still here. I just didn't hear the question. My computer's a little crazy.
Okay. Who is it? Terry Light and Sean Ryan? Who are the people that we should be reaching out for that?
I would just reach out to the group and ask them to appoint an individual as opposed to us telling them who we want. Or we could ask the providers if they have an alternative, but the HVAC seems to be pretty well organized.
Mr.
Okay.
Chair, just in
Yes.
case there's anybody on the phone that's trying to speak, they've been muted automatically, but *6 will unmute. Just as a reminder.
Okay, so if there's anyone on the phone who, I guess the HVAC folks or other, say hello. Can you see a list, Mandy, of the phone numbers?
I can. I see somebody just unmuted themselves from the last 4 digits is 1049. So that might be one. There's 5 phone numbers listed for participants.
Okay, so for the people on the phone, then, if you don't want to just say hello right now, that's fine. We will leave some time at the end of the meeting where we can go through and people can comment, but we do want people involved. This is super early in the process and we want to come up with outline for the best homeless and transient shelters on the planet. So we're very early in that. Okay, so moving on, Meg, do you want to go through your document then?
Hey, John, I just want to second your value there. You want to have the best shelter provision on the planet. I think that should be written down somewhere.
Okay. That'll be our operating motto here. Meg, did you want to go through your document?
I can, John. And I also wanted to mention that HRAC representation, at least through SID, is part of the compliance committee with the Homeless Advisory, the Coalition's Homeless Advisory Resource Council. But we'll make sure they get looped in here. I'll send it directly to HRAC after we're done as well, to invite their participation.
Okay. Yeah, that would, I think that would be good. We might, but let's go through this and augment. I think there's, it's a good outline, but there's like specifics missing that I'd like to get in there. And I almost think that's your intent too, that you were providing the.
Yeah. So the overlay on this is that it's a starting point. It took a couple of other jurisdictions who have specific standards. As I said, tried to put a lot in there. It also should be, and of course I'll let the experts on ESG, the Emergency Solutions Grant requirements weigh in, but it should meet those requirements. As I know, our shelter providers, a lot of them receive ESG funds. So it's a starting point. What I would prefer to do is, again, flag issues or missing pieces, but not run too far down any rabbit holes. It's a long document. And then we can kind of track down in more specifics what needs to be in a particular area, or as we get into specific areas, we may even need to break out further if there are particular experts in areas that want to kind of dig into a section.
Okay, well, why don't you go ahead? We'll assume everybody's got this in front of them in some form. And
Okay,
go ahead and scroll down.
I was just going to, I'm opening it, and then I'm wondering if I can share my screen. Do you want me to do that?
I think that'd be great, yeah.
Okay, we'll see if I know how to do it here. Okay.
Well, Mandy, can Mandy do it?
Yeah, that'd be way better. It would probably go correctly.
We're waiting for a yes, Mandy.
So while she's doing that, I'll just start with, we really started at a high level at the beginning of the document, or I started at the high level, and really wanted to tie this work to work we've already done in the municipality and have it be policy driven through Anchored Home and the Housing First model and utilizing the gap analysis. I think I thought that was really important to tie it into and provide some context and not walk away from the work that's already been done and in fact incorporate it here. So that's the first section, is the policy context there. I'm going to pull this up separately on my computer to take some notes on. I think that would probably be helpful. And then we can utilize those in some fashion moving forward. And I guess I'll just pause after each section, if that's okay with you, Mr. Chair, to see if there are comments or things I should add for notes.
Okay, and I'll watch the chat. So if anyone wants to comment, go ahead and make a note in chat. You know, work it that way.
Okay. So if there's nothing on the policy context, we'll just slide into section 2. Thanks, Mandy. So this just tries to this describes kind of our shelter system and the municipal role in that. And so I have included here emergency shelter and transitional housing. How we ultimately want to have that play out in the document, I think remains to be seen. But I did think that a lot of the substantive requirements seem to go to both types of facilities, and did my best here to do some definition of what that means, and then went further down to define the roles and responsibilities of the municipality. This was written, if you could go a little bit further down, Mandy, that would be great. To really get to adding the health department as primarily responsible for this work within the administration. And then we all hate acronyms, but to keep saying something like transitional housing and shelter licensing, it just became an acronym. So you'll see that THSL, my brain reads it thistle, throughout the document, and that's what it is. You'll see mention here to operating agreements. They might be more accurately described as operational plans, and a lot of reference to policies, procedures that would really get into the nuts and bolts of things as we move along. I have identified, because I talked about transitional housing and shelter providers, I've called them operators. And there the thought was that any facility would have an operator, whether it be, I'll just use myself as an example, whether it's Meg operating the shelter, but then I might work with service providers like Catholic Social Services or Beans or others to deliver some of the additional services, but that the operator is responsible for the operations, the day-to-day, of what happens at the shelter. Then it goes into quality assurance. So this was kind of this was a way to make sure we had some.
Let's go. Do you want to get comments on those first 2 sections? Does anyone from the committee? Okay. One thing that jumped out to me, role of the municipality, and you know, and this kind of focuses, I think, on health department monitoring, the operator, and so on. But you know, we need as a city to make a commitment to the area around any shelter, and that's, you know, I've mentioned before, you know, have a no tolerance zone within some area where there'd be no loitering, no shelter, camping, and so on. And it kind of ties in with the good neighbor policy that you addressed later, and that we've been using at the Sullivan Arena too, and that it's apparently very common around the country on these things. But we as a city would have to make a commitment as well, where we would say there's no tolerance in that neighborhood, you know, the surrounding area, and also guarantee regular police patrols and things like that. So, and it seems like that would be a good place, or this section would be a good place to add that.
Section 2.
Yeah, 2.31, your role of the municipality.
Okay, I'll make a note. It looks like there's some others in the queue.
Why am I missing this?
It looks like Miss Kennedy.
Okay, go ahead,
Yes, I was
Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is back to the term operator. So is it possible that an operator, or you would foresee that it could possibly just be an individual? I mean, obviously it could be a management company of some sort, but would the intent also be to just allow it to be an individual?
So I think that's up for conversation. It does talk about operators having boards later, because we've traditionally had operators being nonprofits. I could see an operator potentially being like Securitas, and then coordinating with service providers. So I think that's something we need to talk about, but I did want to make that differentiation between the overarching entity that's responsible for the operations of the shelter versus the providers we may want to come in to collaborate, especially with regard to day engagement or other, I guess, substantive services, whether that's case management or other. That was the distinction I was trying to make.
Okay, I'd like to
Thank you,
also for the
yes.
record, sorry, Jamie Allard has joined us. Go ahead, Crystal.
Okay, yeah, and thank you. And I appreciate the fact that we can talk a little bit more about that, because I agree. I would typically expect it to be some kind of a group, like more like a management company, or like you said, like Securitas. But anyway, it would be an interesting conversation to see if an individual on its own could be considered the operator, and then everything else was basically hired services. So thank you.
Yeah, and you'll notice when we get to the definitional section that it's completely blank, that we'll need to go back and fill that in. I thought we should just wait to do that as we got more refinement on the document.
Okay. Moving
Okay.
on.
Sure. I saw Miss McNulty's hand up. John?
How are you seeing? I'm totally missing these things. So, Michelle, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. This is Michelle McNulty. Meg, I have a quick question. So in Title 21, we have transitional housing as a separate use under residential uses, and it's separate than housing and homeless shelter and transient shelters. So I'm curious, I just want to clarify that are you suggesting that we add a license to that transitional housing use, or is it just that we're mixing up terms?
No, there was no mixing up terms, I don't believe. I think that if you're providing short-term, I guess this is where, yeah, Title 21 kind of intersects with, I believe, kind of the more substantive part of the homelessness response system. I look at transitional housing since it's short-term, that they're very similar requirements and similar concerns as well that would want to be addressed. So that's why I've included them both here. If that's problematic from a Title 21 perspective, we can certainly dive in deeper to why that is and if they couldn't be together. Also, if we, there are some, there's one out of Alameda County that has shelter information and then transitional housing information, but I felt like there was so much overlap and this was already really long that I didn't separate them out, but that could also be another route.
So in Title 21 transitional housing, you can live there for up to 24 months. So it is up to 2-year housing. Typically in homeless shelters, it's not defined by Title 21, but in a lot of definitions, it typically says up to 60 days. So I really would like to maybe just put a red flag on that. And I think we need to explore it more. And I'd also like to pull in legal to make sure that we're not getting sideways with the Fair Housing Act.
Okay, yeah, and I want to make sure that we also then are mindful of whatever the transitional housing definition is for purposes of HUD. as well, so that stays in transitional housing don't undermine or undercut someone's status as being, I believe, someone who's also still considered to be experiencing homelessness, or taking them off a wait list for housing vouchers. So yeah, let's have that more in-depth conversation about that.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. I don't see anyone else in the chat asking to speak. So go ahead, Meg.
Okay, so it goes on to do regular programmatic reviews, the standards and site reviews, and a monitoring plan if there was an operator's not meeting either contractual or licensing obligations. Really, the idea would be that that there's kind of a step approach to ensuring quality services and compliance. And then it goes on to talk about, since this is a really comprehensive document, the idea would be that it would be reviewed at least, I put every 5 years, but if there, I have some questions about that, whether HUD has specific continuum of care guidelines on review periods, or if there's just another time that would make more sense. I was trying to have it dovetail with the HUD continuum of care, or I think we should keep that in mind, guideline requirements that the coalition works on so that we don't duplicate efforts.
Okay, any comments on that?
Hi, this is Nicole from the Health Department.
Go ahead, Nicole.
Thank you. I would just suggest that we do take notice that not all providers or operators do receive HUD funding, or even specifically ESG funding. And so I don't know how to address that necessarily. It's just a question that I had while reviewing the document for the first time yesterday, to say they are getting resources. And sometimes when you require people to have improved behaviors, improved standards of care, it comes alongside of those additional resources. And then it qualifies you for those resources. And in some cases, some of the providers or operators are not receiving those. And so I don't know how to address that, what might be perceived as inequity. So I just want it noted, and for us to sort of peel that back at some point through discussion.
Nicole, when you say inequity, you mean different operators treated differently, or would the clients have some difference?
Yes, the operators being funded at different levels from different entities. So sometimes they're receiving funds from the COC, sometimes additional funds through AHD, as we are both receivers of HUD funds and then distribute those into our community. And then some operators receive none of those funds, but presumably would be accountable for the same standards of licensing. So it's just does that make sense?
We draw on you for what makes sense.
I think that there's slight inequity there. Yeah.
That helps me frame this a little better. Chris Johnson?
Yeah, thank you. I think, though, that is a pretty firm distraction from where we're going at this point. The point isn't to tie how an operator behaves in a neighborhood to funding. The point is to set a baseline of how operators are supposed to operate when they exist in places outside of the PLI. And so if we're going to be granting the authority of these entities by conditional use to operate, then there have to be effective conditions to ensure we don't see Third and Carlick happen again. And so that's the fundamental principle. The funding question, I understand that's important to those who operate these shelters, but that is not the issue that we're addressing here. Here, we're addressing the baseline standards of what it takes to operate in the best homeless services environment. And so when we come to the question of funding, that's a whole other topic, and it's a great topic, but it's not the topic that we're addressing here. We're addressing how low can the bar go in a neighborhood and it still be legally allowed to operate there.
We don't want that bar too low either.
Agreed.
Nicole, do you have a thought on that? Response?
Yes, I hear your point, Mr. Constance. I would just say when we are specifically referring to CFRs and within the first lines of the CFRs, it says who those CFRs apply to, and those only apply to all shelters who are assisted under the ESG program. There is a very distinct line drawn between this funding source and these regulations. And so I do not want to distract from the conversation. I just want it noted that eventually we need to have that conversation and make sure that we're attending to the additional costs that it may require to provide this increased level of service. So that's a later conversation. It's true. That's why I'm saying please just note it to unpack it at some point before we're complete.
And I would just add the dovetail to that is we have ramped up funding for shelter services radically in the last 18 months. And so we're cognizant of that, and we will address that. And we will ensure that every operator, whether they receive HUD funding or municipal funding or donor funds that are operating in places outside of PLI that are granted a conditional use, operate at a baseline level that doesn't harm a neighborhood.
All right, thanks, Chris and Nicole. And it's safe for anyone who would review this in the who run shelters and knows, Lisa and Jasmine and so on, and Nicole. It would, as we'll go through Meg's, but there's also a kind of another list that we'd worked out that has just a whole bunch of brainstormed ideas. And as we go through any of these documents, if you see something that you just say, this is simply not possible to be done, or this would cost far more than the benefit or something, that's the kind of information we need from you as we go through these. It's okay. I don't see anyone else requesting to speak in the chat. If I'm missing someone, chime in. Okay, Meg, you want to keep rolling?
Sure. Next is the use of the Homelessness Management Information Center, HMIS, or system HMIS. And then, there's someone who is not
Someone's
muted.
breaking up.
Yeah.
Is that someone who needs to mute, or Meg, are you breaking up?
I don't think it's me, but because I'm hearing it as well. And then
Check folks.
I'll try to just keep plugging on here because this is really long. I will say that this was really tossed out because it had originally been started and then shelved for a while, and I honestly didn't get any kind of assistance in writing this. So this is just things pulled from other jurisdictions and then looking at the ESG requirements. And I understand the point that Nicole made. So this is really a starting point. So I hope people can accept that, that it's just to get the conversation going because it wasn't really moving. Then section 3 is define terms. As I mentioned, it would be open. We should definitely define a bunch of terms. And then section 4 would be applicable legislation, so that it would be really putting in what may or may not apply. So that CFR regarding ESG housing or ESG standards is in there, and that will be a conversation to continue to have around to what extent these apply. Do they apply to everything outside of PLI? Do they apply to those who only receive certain types of funding? So it's there, but of course it can be updated. Notice section 4.4, standards, policies, and guidelines. I would like anything to cross-reference everything that already applies. I think that's really important. So that we're making sure that everyone's on notice of where all the different departments, policies, procedures, and guidelines dovetail together. And before I jump into 5, I'll pause for a quick sec, although I don't see anyone.
Okay, any comments from attendees? All right, thanks, Meg. Go ahead.
Okay, so next, principles of service delivery. This is really based on the idea of client-centered care or client-centered delivery. This was feedback I got specifically from Kathleen McLaughlin about why or how she's found success in the past. So I took that to heart, and really it goes through, it outlines just basic decency standards for treating clients who come in, and that it's client-centered services, that really we put the client at the center of developing a service plan. Service plan here is the idea of, again, where I made that distinction between operator and service providers, that if your service plan lives with a particular entity, or however it needs to work. And again, this is where the providers will be able to come in and provide really great information on the practicality of this to ensure that we are creating standards that set clients up for success. And it reiterates the housing first model, that housing should be the goal out of shelter and transitional housing to get folks housed on a more permanent basis and independently as possible. And then section 5.4 goes into shelter and transitional housing services. So just ensuring that folks can access services to the extent, maximum extent possible. I think that that's a key, absent. And further down in the document, it does deal with clients who can't or have an access restriction due to a behavior or some other instance that would prevent them from being able to access the service, and how to document that. And then I think a lot of these, unless there's specific things folks want to talk about, I mean, service quality and collaboration are really issues in section 5 that, you know, we're already doing a lot of this work, but this is really to collaborate towards good outcomes for clients and ensure that we're being respectful and responsive to the neighborhood in which a shelter is located and the wider community. There in section 5.6, two little I's, that might be where we want to flesh out more about any good neighbor policy or something like that. So again, a pause before moving on to section 6.
Okay, I don't see anyone asking in the chat. I had a few comments on this, but is there anyone else who wants to jump in quick?
Mr. Chair, Chris Constant was in the queue.
Is that right? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm missing some of these, so feel free to chime in, or Manny, you see someone. Chris, go ahead. Oh, Chris says no.
Yeah,
I think we already got that.
That was before, yeah. That was 10 minutes
Okay.
ago.
All right, thanks. So let's see section 5 here. Couple thoughts I had. Okay, highlighted this. One concept I think throughout is, we have this thing, okay, we want to shelter them, and I think you can't make progress and understand is make progress on a lot of these things till they have a safe place to stay, know that they'll have food, and you have those basic things taken care of, and a place to store their stuff. So those are very fundamental things, and then we can make progress on some of the other issues that they have. But ultimately, I always want to keep the theme that the focus is to guide the client towards a self-sufficient life. And I don't see that in here, but I like that wherever we can put it. And I think even in housing first, that's first, and then as a step towards that ultimate goal. And I don't want that ever to get lost.
Okay, I'll make the note. So you said self-sufficient life?
Yeah, and I've just penciled in a few things here, like operators will, you have little I, double I, and added a triple I, will work to give the client the tools and direction towards a self-sufficient life. And there certainly can be better wording, but, and then further, where you have access to shelter and transitional, so the 5.4, added in there, really we want to create an environment that's preferable to life on the streets. and that's I think the professionals doing this and the people from HRAC is like, what would make it so people will choose to move out of the woods and off the streets and into this shelter? What, and I guess we need to, why don't they now? But, we want to, if they won't do that, then how are we going to make progress with them? And we certainly, for the public, need to show there's been a change. We set up this shelter and there are less people in your neighborhood, less people on the streets. But that's just fundamental. How do we make it preferable? And so that I put that way at the top. And then a small thing on what was your little I on regarding people with disabilities. You might have dealt with this before, but I'm not sure every shelter can handle people with certain level of disabilities. And that's looking at what we're doing now. I think, at Sullivan Arena, if someone has kind of severe disabilities, they're going to Brother Francis, and Brother Francis is being the specialist in that.
John, if I might just briefly note,
Chris,
though, that we have to be very careful how we define disabilities, because I would suggest that most of the individuals who are circling through the crisis emergency system experience a disability. And so we need to be careful with that framing. So just, that's an area we should explore a bit.
Yeah, good point. Thanks. So then 5.6. Okay, and then I just augmented it, but you made the point, is in the 5.6, cooperating and supporting a no tolerance zone within, and I put a quarter mile. I don't know what the distance would be of the shelter or transitional housing. Would be no loitering, no drug use, no camping, no trespassing. But that just to protect that community directly around the shelter. There's probably a number of places that could go, but it seems to fit there. So those are my thoughts. Anyone else? All right, thanks. Go ahead, Meg.
Okay, I've noted all of those, and we can dive in deeper on some of them. I can say that I have some pushback on some of those things you've said, John. So again, this is where we're going to have to make the notes and then, divide them out further. Clients' rights and responsibilities. This is pretty clear as to the idea that we empower clients to have both rights in a shelter, of course, and then responsibilities to conform to the rules of the shelter, be respectful, respect the property, clients, staff, volunteers, and visitors in the neighborhood, and to work collaboratively on that service plan towards achieving the goal set out, and to have clients also not discriminate, engage in violent, abusive, or harassing behavior. So the idea here is very similar to other models of facilities that provide care and treatment. There's usually clients' rights and responsibilities. That would definitely be something I would want to, excuse me, talk to HRAC more in depth about as well. Similarly, the 6.1 section, client input. Again, this is really going to that client-centered approach, and to try to create some kind of client-based ownership over their own choices, and somewhat make sure that they have a voice within the facility, so that they feel invested. They feel invested both in the facility they're in and it running really well and smoothly, and the neighborhood, and that they're a part of something, not just they're, moving in and out if they have to stay for a period of time because they're awaiting housing or some other service. Anything on that? And we'll just move on then to section 7. We're going to run short on time, I think. This was complaints and appeals. So the idea here is that there's a structure if there's a client complaint. That's really what it gets to, and then that there's like a route for that complaint. That we can, if there, I would expect to hear from both providers and the health department on how well that would work. So I think that will be something we have to flesh out, but it provides a framework. Section 8 is access requests and customer service. So what we want to do is make sure that we ensure that it's really clear what shelters are available and how to have a client be able to get access to a shelter other than necessarily just walking up. And then intake and assessment, the idea to assess clients' needs coming in, making sure they move into the HMIS system or it's updated. So again, it's an idea that we make sure we're coordinating access and intake so that we are providing the right level of care, that the person's in the right type of facility or the right facility. That maybe, if there's an individual, I think we're seeing this somewhat now at the mass shelter at the Sullivan as someone comes in and their needs are known and we find that there might be a better fit at another location. Some folks have moved there. So it's really just a way to ensure that people are in the right place, or the next section, a referral to refer on to another place that is maybe more suited for that client's individual needs, or if there's not an availability. So this whole section really goes into getting someone in the door and situated and making sure they're in the right place to meet their needs. And that really continues to move on through 8, till we get to 8.3.1, which I had flagged that particular one. Are we contemplating bed reservations? I have in my notes, bring the coalition into this discussion. I think that's part of the overall system design. So it's just left there as a flag for further follow-up. The curfew piece is something that's common in the lower 48, and I know there's been a curfew at the mass shelter. So that kind of runs through that idea. It also then gets to some of the neighborhood concerns about people outside the building all times of the day. And then making sure we keep track of the number of beds. We've got the dashboard going right now, and I know there's another system where folks call in what their bed count is or what their occupancy rate is. And it really just gets into the nuts and bolts of ensuring that we know how many people are there, what's available, and then length of stay. As Michelle indicated for transitional housing, that it's already defined in code for that at 24 months. This one had triggering a 90-day at least reassessment of a client's service plan, kind of just asking some questions about why is that person still in shelter, and then seeing if there's anything else that may need to be addressed, or if it's just a matter of they're still waiting for a particular housing program or a voucher or something like that to come available. Daytime access. This whole scheme presumes daytime access, but if there isn't for some reason, there's some information there if that's not the case. Or I could see potentially, and we know from this past, I guess a year ago summer, that daytime could have to be cut if there were funding restrictions, or we've seen that happen. So really it just gets into trying to figure out what to do then with folks during the daytime if in fact a program or an operator has to cut that service or doesn't offer it. So I just ran through a whole bunch of sections. I'm going to just pause briefly.
Any comments from the crowd? We see Nicole has left. Thanks, Nicole. And anyone else? I had a few points on this. And one, I like the reserve beds. You know, I worry, and this is something, Lisa, feel free to comment on, but you know, it seems like, you know, people don't know, they leave in the morning and then they come back. They don't know that they have a safe place or place to stay. That uncertainty lingers with them all along, and that's the certainty of a place to stay is very valuable. But also if they come and then they don't get a bed, well, it's late and they just pitch a tent on the sidewalk, and that obviously has caused some problems. So the reservation system seems very critical to me. And then also the day activities, I think, are also important. I think we've seen that is, you know, if they have nighttime and they get kicked out at some time in the morning, well, now there's an impact on the neighborhood. So my sense on this, and certainly could be talked out of it, but my starting point is I want a homeless shelter to have daytime activities. So they get up and clear the mats out, and now that area is for daytime stuff. But I want that. I'd be, you know, maybe there's a nearby facility that could be used instead that would mean the shelter itself doesn't require. But I think those need to go hand in hand, or you're guaranteeing negative neighborhood spin-off. We can't have that. And then just a couple of things, and I think these are definitions. When I read it, couple things. When you say quite often board approved, and I assume that's the board of whatever nonprofit, but it's not, and that I think could go on the definitions. And then, sorry, I'm scrolling through. But I know there are a couple other things in there I didn't quite understand. And then you've got a 4 a.m. as final number of occupied beds at 4 a.m. And why would the 4 a.m. be a trigger? Is that important?
No, it was just pulled out of another jurisdiction. I mean, that's
Okay.
those kinds of specifics I think we need to hear from the providers. When's a good time to take a bed count? I believe, if I remember from Nancy, I think there's a slightly after midnight call-in opportunity now to indicate if beds are available. But we can certainly, you know, I just had to put something in there. Putting a giant X didn't really help.
Okay, and a comment from Lisa says, we have found in COVID that Brother Francis Shelter is operating on a system with reserve beds and operating day and night, and that is better in many ways. All right, thanks, Lisa. And Crystal?
Thank you. Meg, I had a question about when you referred to the section, I think it's section 4 on legislation, and you had a comment about needing policies either from the fire department or police department that, you know, may need to go into that section. And I was just curious as to whether or not you've had any conversation with them specifically at this point. And I guess my bigger question then is, do you think would you need the public safety committee to play any kind of role in this? So kind of a two-part question there. Thanks.
I'll answer them in order. No, I haven't had specific conversations, but I do know that like fire has to sign off, you know, on overnight accommodations, things like that. I was thinking along the lines back to marijuana or others where we check in with various departments to see if there are any concerns. But I do believe there's probably food handling if food is on site. So there's probably food handling policies that are already in place for like the health department. On the public safety side or the public safety committee, I didn't see a specific role, but it's something I'm gonna note, and then I can see if and then think about, and I think that's a great conversation to have. I was thinking that if there were licensing concerns that they would likely come to the Committee on Homelessness, but they could also go to health policy, or they could go to possibly public safety. So I think that's one of those nuts and bolts issues that we'll have to dig in deeper to figure out what's most suited.
All right,
Okay,
thanks.
well, yeah, I appreciate that. I didn't want to make the process more arduous, than it has to be. So I just thought whatever's helpful, you can just let us know. But, it kind of does get to that point where the old adage, too many cooks in the kitchen sometimes spoils the stew. So anyway, just don't want to drag it out. Thanks.
Thanks.
Just quick, Jamie Allard has left, and Lisa Aquino put in the text that some of these are going pretty far down into operation specifics, and without sustained additional funding are going to be hard to implement across the board, something to consider. And to Lisa and others, that kind of thing, as you go through this document and some other things we may send, that kind of thing would be real valuable. Is if some of these sections are already dealt with in other places, or if they increase costs dramatically, we need to have that information for moving forward. So appreciate that. Dean, you had a comment?
Yes, I'm not sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was just gonna follow up on Crystal's comment about Section 4, the applicable laws to follow. And, when we have things like this in code, there's usually just a simple statement saying that the operator or licensee shall comply with all applicable federal, state, and local laws. That's it. But when we get into a document like this one that's more specific, with standards listed out, this is more like a compliance guideline, and listing out those laws are helpful. But I think, like Crystal said, referred to like fire code and stuff like that, you maybe just have, we can put language in there that's about the facilities shall be compliant with building codes, applicable building codes, and so forth. So we can get into a little more detail. But I just wanted to mention that distinction between what is usually put in the Anchorage Municipal Code and what might be in implementing guidelines or policies like this one.
All right, thanks, Dean. And I need to correct, Jamie left. She was on the phone and on her computer. She is still here on her computer.
John.
Thanks. Chris?
Dean, I think to your point, what I see happening is we are going to have items that are based on the conditional use, which are the use-specific requirements. Then we're going to have items that we generally find are black and white standards that can't be avoided. And then we'll have a third category, which are these areas where we can't require because of cost or because of other challenges that are related to implementation, but we have to work together to get agreement by the parties that these standards will be met in whatever way we all agree on. So I see it in three categories there. The building code ones seem more to fall on the conditional use side. These behavioral and organizational ones are in that middle category that are black and white, and then also those behavioral ones are more in that third category, are things that we might not be able to require, but we need to come up with a plan where all parties agree.
All right, thanks, Chris. Anything else from committee? All right, go ahead, Meg.
So I'm wondering if, in the interest of time, do we want to jump to, I think folks have a flavor for the document. I know we've been going through it, but if we would want to jump to section, sorry, I'm pulling it up as fast as I can, around facilities management that might have more Title 21, or do we want to see if there are any questions as well that deal directly with things that folks haven't seen and think should maybe be here? I can tell you the next parts really get into privacy and food, and that there's adequate personal space and amenities for clients. And then into the idea of on-site case management or other supportive services, which would really be the day shelter in section 10. I don't know how much value there is for me just to kind of walk through the documents fairly, even though it's lengthy, it's fairly self-explanatory. So I'm open to whatever here, John, but I really want to make sure we're getting as much discussion as possible around this. And I know it's a dense document.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I think it's hard for people who have just seen this, and I imagine we get pretty good feedback from people who deal with this if they have a chance to go through it and make some comments. So that may be a good way to do it. And I think when this travels to the various people, I'd like to package it with some of the points that were in our previous meeting that were just like bullet points on the kind of things that that had come up, for dealing with the things like, like I made the point on, having reservations and so on, things like that, the neighborhood plan and what that would look like and so on. So probably maybe I'll write up an outline of that and send it to folks as well, and maybe post it online and try to couch it so people know these aren't requirements. These are brainstorming ideas at our starting point here. Chris Schutte, you're here, and we'd like to get all this stuff done expeditiously. I mean, we're told it could be 6 months or more. What is a way to go forward briskly?
Thank you. Through the chair, Assemblymember Weddleton. I think that the exercise today is part of that process, as is the subsequent smaller group revisions on the specific subject areas. Just to recap, like you started the meeting with, this is a two-pronged process, if you will. There are specific licensure items, and the licensure items I think can proceed concurrent with any required modifications to Title 21. Then the Title 21 process, which I think, unless others disagree, I think the Title 21 amendments that will be required are going to be relatively simpler than getting the community's arms around the operating requirements or the licensing requirements. However, even though it's an easier exercise to edit those, it is a lengthier public process. And so at some point soon, I think the separation between those two subject areas will be further refined so that we can commence with the Title 21 text amendment process as we continue to finalize, or as you all continue to finalize the licensing requirements. In short, from what we have covered today, there's obviously a lot for members and the public to get their arms around in this first draft. And we've been taking diligent notes and identifying the items that we can sequester away from operational concerns that are clearly the zoning concerns. And I think if not the next CEDC meeting, one shortly thereafter, we probably can be in a place where we've identified what the zoning specific concerns are and come to agreement from the committee and participants that that's the direction to go and start the formal process for the text amendments.
Okay, that's good. So when you, how soon would you have that? I'm saying, I guess you're the zoning requirements, sort of a draft of that.
Yeah, so through the chair, I think by time we have a chance to download with staff after this meeting on the notes that we've taken in the areas we identified as directly applying to Title 21, we can refine that list and bring that back to the committee at your meeting next month. And I think that would be the jumping off point. I think that would be a formal, well, it wouldn't be a resolution, but we would bring to you the proposed text amendments, and then with the committee's agreement, we could move forward with the process.
So are you saying in September, or can we do it at end of August?
I'm losing track of time. I actually don't even know what month it is anymore, but we would need a minimum of 3 weeks. Yes, 3 to 4 weeks. So maybe the end of late August. However, keep in mind that that is a holiday week, Labor Day, and so realistically, the first meeting of September seems more doable.
Okay. Well, I think to some extent we'll work on your schedule. If you get it done early, we'll have a meeting and address it. And is, Chris, is your expectation that would be in AO form?
Through the chair, yes. The text amendments that we would take forward, we would present. Well, I think we would, for this group, we would present it conceptually, but ultimately, what does go forward is presented in ordinance form.
Okay. Okay. All right. Good. And Michelle, any thoughts on that?
Nope, that's a doable time frame.
Okay. Well, good. I just watching the months click by and the need to get this done. Okay. So then Meg, on yours, do you want to kind of tie a bow on it, or what would you like to do here?
Yeah, I'm good tying a bow on this for now to put out for more comments. I think that if particularly members or the administration are seeing big gaps or something I failed to address or take up here, please let me know or let whoever know. And then we should probably identify a work group to go in and create a second draft or something to then bring back before the subcommittee. Feels really cumbersome to try to, it would be very cumbersome to try to edit in this subcommittee versus a smaller work group that can really dig in, and that could also bring back, if the subcommittee needs to discuss particular substantive issues in depth, to figure out potential directions to go.
Okay, and you know, if you know, the Title 21 part with the conditional use permit is kind of early September-ish, we can do this as a separate effort. And if things get done faster, is have a meeting at the end of August. We're two sort of, it's a separate piece, and this is a licensing. So Chris, who I mean, I thought Michelle's doing the Title 21 on the licensing side. That was one of our tasks for the end of last meeting, is who will do that? Kind of put this all together and create that. Is there a department? Is that all on the clerks, or?
Through the chair, unless I misheard things today, I believe the original offer from Assemblyman Zalatal was for the Anchorage Health Department to manage it, but I'm reluctant to put them on the hook since Nicole got off the phone and can't defend herself. I guess the short answer is it is one of those two departments. They both deal with licensing and contract management currently, and so we'd want to make sure that they concur.
If I might, I would add the legal department needs a strong hand.
Okay, all right, good. So Quincy, are you on the phone or here?
I'm here.
Okay. What are your thoughts on moving forward and expeditiously?
I'm more than willing to be on the smaller committee. And yeah, everything Chris said. I think this part, even though it's a little bit painful, I think it still is important and needs to happen, but the most of the work will get done in the smaller subgroups.
Okay, it's not painful if we meet in person. Sometimes I brought donuts. So, okay,
I would
good.
just
So
reiterate, if I might, that I'm really seeing three buckets here. One is the conditional use, land use, building safety. One is strict licensing rules, and then the third is the category of agreements, which are kind of like neighborhood responsibility plans. And so once we get through this conversation, we might end up breaking into a few different subgroups.
well, you know, Chris, in my head, I've got kind of those neighborhood agreements underneath this license requirements.
Yeah, I think that's true, except that these are the things that probably are less achievable in the strict licensing because of things that have been raised, cost or issues of law. And so I'm guessing there are some things that's going to be a totally different piece. That might be a reference, I think, but we'll see. Again, I see 3 buckets as opposed to 2 now.
Okay, well, that's okay. So how would you like to approach that then, Chris? Do you want to draft something up that say this would be a model neighborhood agreement?
Yeah, much that goes into that pool are the things that the operators identify as this is not exactly strictly workable. That the legal department says these are the areas where we need to be very careful of, and right. And so those items that don't fit squarely into either of these categories because of challenges should be in that final area. And so I can write something up about this, but that's the simple framework for me. I think is those 3. There might be more that arise. I mean, the first one, the conditional use, the building safety can be different than the Title 21 issues, but really those are married in a lot of ways. But those could become 2. But for now, I see the 3.
Okay. Okay, I think I see your point there. Okay, thanks. So Meg, you're in and then out?
Yeah.
Okay. Jamie, I'm sorry, go ahead.
You were correct, John.
Okay. Jamie, are you able to speak? Jamie had texted me that she had trouble on her phone and the laptop's not working well. If you're on the phone, Jamie, I think *6 unmutes you. Hold on, I got a text. Okay, no, so she can't speak, but okay. So I think on our agenda, so we've got that done. I guess we can't really, can we set a meeting time for something else, or we'll wait and see how things gel in the next week or so on progress on the license?
Actually, John, this is Meg. I changed my mind. Q, please.
Go ahead.
Sure. So I'm a little bit concerned with simply coming up with the mechanics of a licensing scheme without the substantive provisions. I think these 2 go hand in hand. I understand that they might be 2 separate pathways or 2 separate products, but I think what we've been asked to do by the public is ensure that there are substantive rules around shelter that address their concerns. And I know I've heard the same requests from people with lived experience. So I want to make sure that we work collaboratively with all the stakeholders to talk about what those substantive requirements should be, but not divorce it from the other pieces. Because if we simply put forward that there need to be licenses in the Title 21 use specific standards, but we don't have, quite frankly, what I think is the meat of it and the realities of what's possible, what's not possible, what are the fiscal constraints, then I feel like we haven't done the full job. So I just want to flag that, because I feel like that part's kind of being pushed aside to kind of run through the mechanics of it, but mechanics without substance isn't going to leave me satisfied, or I believe, quite frankly, the public or others satisfied as well.
So you want to see some explicit requirements in the license and make sure that they mesh with the conditional use requirements?
Yes, or that there's a document adopted by reference, so more like the design standards that we have, or something like that, so that it's very clear what the expectation is. Not the expectation, I'm sorry, the requirement is.
Right.
and how that's going to play out in operation. I think we owe it to shelter providers to provide the clarity on what we're going to expect as well, and not have it come after the fact. So I feel like all three of these pieces need to move in tandem. And I understand the Title 21 stuff might be slightly separate, but particularly as to licensing and what we're actually going to expect and require, I think has to move together.
Right. So now you say three. So we have the conditional use piece, and then you said, I guess you're saying there's two other pieces. What are those two other pieces when you refer to it?
Oh, I was just referring to what Mr. Constant had referred to.
Okay.
He had identified buckets.
Okay. Right. Yeah, I'd like to have things very concrete too. And I think in what you prepared, you've got kind of a loose framework that needs to get those very detailed. If we have details, put them in there and say, these are the requirements. Is that kind of getting to what you're saying?
Yes, so everyone is very clear.
Right. Okay. Well, good. So my question is when? But we'll wait because Michelle has a comment on that, perhaps an answer.
More of a comment. So thanks. This is Michelle McNulty. So I agree with everything Meg just said. I actually had those same concerns, and would even elaborate that timing is going to be very important, because if we modify the use specific standards and specifically are saying something to the effect that a license is required, then that license has to be established before we can implement that or it can go into effect. Because otherwise we're just saying, hey, these things are required, but they don't exist yet.
Oh, when it's, yeah, that makes sense. I think all of us should be on board with that. We want the full package on whatever date we go with this. So
yeah.
But do you need the license to get things moving at the Planning and Zoning Commission?
We don't to get it moving, but I think that her points are definitely, I think at some point someone, either you all or the planning department, are going to start to hear, well, that's fine that these things are required as use specific, but what does that mean? Both from the provider standpoint and the public standpoint. So I think they can run concurrently. I just really wanted to underscore what Meg just suggested.
Okay, good, thanks. Anything else from the committee?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. Thanks. I just would offer to that, it was my understanding that the process through the Title 21 review was the long, slow haul. And so it was my understanding, and it continues to be my understanding going forward, that we can get through the licensing in the timeline it takes for that entire process to go along its path in planning and zoning. And so I don't know if there is actually any kind of a disconnect here. All of these pieces will be moving concurrently, will inform each other, but I think that the largest time investment is that planning and zoning process, if I'm not mistaken. I'd be happy to be corrected.
Any Michelle or Meg on that?
No, Chris is correct, and I wasn't suggesting that they be separated or that they couldn't run concurrently. The Title 21 is the longer of the hauls. I just wanted to make sure that that we were saying the same thing, and that as we were starting the Title 21 process, that the license process and any other neighborhood plan or template was being created, that they were running on the same kind of wavelength, because at some point they have to merge together. So yes, Christopher's correct.
Right, and Michelle, my sense, if I were on the Planning Commission and I got this document and it refers to license, my question would be, can I see what that requires? Because that would help, as a commissioner, to evaluate the conditions that are on this conditional use. So we'd like to have, maybe it would not necessarily be submitted as the original package, but have it there, a week prior to their public hearing and meeting on it. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. And that's kind of what I was trying to get at. So thank you for articulating that. So I think what we should do as part of our follow-up meeting in September is not only provide kind of what Title 21 changes we are preparing, but have a more outlined schedule that really shows, what the schedule to take the text amendments to Title 21 are, and then where we need these other documents to be completed and enter the process.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. Okay. That would be very helpful. Okay, good. Meg, does that work?
Sure, it works for me. I think we have to definitely make sure that the timing will work for the health department or some other MOA department that's going to ultimately be responsible for the implementation. And we'll definitely want to be at the helm here as we work through what these excuse me, standards ultimately look like.
Okay, good. We got a few minutes left, not a lot. Mandy, can you manage public comments? Do you see people in my way? So anyone in the public who wants to speak, we've got typically up to 3 minutes, but we only have about 4 left in the meeting. So if you speak, please be brief.
Hello, can you hear me?
Sure, can you identify yourself?
Yeah, this is Eugene Carl Haberman. I'll be
Eugene,
very,
okay.
very brief.
Sure,
Okay.
Thanks for coming.
Okay. My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I follow the public process. When the public process is done appropriately, a decision made by the governing body is more likely in public interest. Represent myself, and I live in the Signal Valley. First note here. I listened to the entire meeting with strong interest, but I strongly encourage you, when you first introduce this for public hearing at the assembly, then schedule the public hearing for at least 30 days later when you introduce it. That way, the community councils throughout the community will have a chance to connect on this issue instead of being disconnecting on this issue. And then I'm also worried is that you might do a repeat where at the introduction of the first public hearing, I've witnessed a scenario where you had a reading of an S&S1 version, and I'm in reference to the hearing that you had 4 different hearings, and the reading of the SS1 version of that particular document occurred. Let the public only speak once, and it was introduced for reading at the very first public hearing. So that left a serious problem with the public. So I caution against having that scenario happen again. Third thing, as a note, in the beginning of the meeting, I heard assembly members address here, and also Zalatel around 10:20, the word stakeholders. This is a public meeting. When you start saying the word stakeholders, you're saying certain people you want to connect with and others you don't want to connect with. So address it as public. Don't use stakeholder. This is a public meeting. It's not a stakeholder meeting. And by saying that, I strongly encourage you to disconnect using that word stakeholders. And I wish you all the best, and thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Gene. Is there anyone else? *6 unmutes you. Mandy, can you see people unmuting, or what's the activity?
I don't see anybody. There's a couple that are still muted. There's a couple that are not, but it doesn't appear that they're attempting to speak.
Okay. So I think we should wrap up. I'd like to say for any of the public and others, if you're not speaking, but if you have some thoughts, there are documents on the Community and Economic Development Committee website. So go to muni.org, click on the assembly icon. On the left, click on committees, and that'll put you to a page where you can find the website. And also you can email any of us your thoughts, weddletonj@muni.org, and Meg would have something similar. But we do want anyone who's listening in to participate in this and have comments. This is extremely early. No decisions are close to being made. So this is a time to get in any of your thoughts and recommendations. Anything else from the committee? We ready to adjourn? Oh, Dean Gates says, actually, muni.org still works, Dean, and it's so much shorter.
Same. I use my muni.org one because otherwise it's way too long.
Okay, we ready to adjourn, folks?
Move to adjourn.
All right, thanks. Talk to y'all later.